Working with dashboards, right-click menus. When working with tables or pivot tables and other data display functions on many dashboards, you have the ability to right-click to display a menu of interactions that are applicable to the view that you're looking at. Now, the interactions that are available when you right-click depend on a number of different things, including the type of data that you're using and the data that you've selected, and whether or not the right-click functions have actually been allowed on the dashboard. Now, in this particular case, we're looking at the General Financial Management dashboard for current account balances. And on this particular dashboard, a lot of the right-click functions either have been allowed or have been allowed to remain enabled. So I can use those right-click menus on any of these data columns or many of the data columns to adjust the way I'm viewing the dashboard or viewing the data that's been being presented on the dashboard. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar with some of these different right-click functions. And some of you may not be, which is exactly why we're doing the video. So just as an example here, we're looking at the current account balance report in the summary by account number version of that report, that view. And there are a number of different views, and I may change the view here from time to time. But in this particular view, I've allotted these data columns near the left-hand side of the report that seem to me to be not necessarily needed for my viewing of the report. I know that this is fiscal year 2020. I know it's period 10, and I know the department and college that I belong to. So I could choose to right-click on the column header, and I get this pop-up menu. And this is the right-click menu that I'm referring to when I'm referring to right-clicking. There are a lot of different functions here, and I'm just moving my mouse through them. But the function I'm interested in this particular instance is my ability to exclude this particular column, or any particular column for that matter, from this analysis. And this is only being excluded during this period of time while I'm actually viewing this dashboard. So I chose to exclude the fiscal year column from the report. It takes a few seconds and the report runs itself again, refreshes itself, and that fiscal year column is gone. And I can do the same thing for period number and probably college name and department code or organization code. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to exclude all four of those columns. And the only reason I'm doing this, or that I'm choosing to do this, is because for me it cleans up the report and removes, at least during this time while I'm viewing the report, those extra columns that seem to me to just make the report busier than it needs to be. All the rest of the data is still on this report, although I do notice that I have lost one thing, and I've lost a grand total row down here at the bottom. There was a grand total row down here at the very bottom totaling up all the values on this report, and that was lost because I chose to exclude one of those columns. And I believe it was the department column, the organization code column. So that may have been, I may have gone a step too far, but don't worry, I can also right-click on any column header, and I can choose to include a column. Now, I can include any of the columns that are in this list, including ones that I didn't even know were here. I can include any of these columns that I wish to include, and there are more columns down here. I'm going to carefully click the little down arrow, and you can see a lot of these columns as I'm scrolling through that I could choose to include in the report if I had the desire to do so. I think the one I want to add in is this organization code column right here. So I'm adding that back into the report after I just got done removing it. And it dropped in, not where I wanted it to, but it dropped into the report. And I'm going to grab it now and I'm going to move it over. and drop it in front of the other columns to the left of. And now that column is back in place, and I get an opportunity to show you another right-click function. Because that total function, the grand total, is missing from this report now, because I had gotten a little ahead of myself and chose to remove that column, I can also right-click on the column header, and I get my pop-up menu, and I can show either a subtotal, which in effect would be a grand total of this report, at some place in the report, or I can show the row level grand total after the values. And that drops in, after the report refreshes itself, it drops in the grand total at the very bottom of the report. Now, I didn't necessarily need to add the organization code back in, but it does separate that row out a little bit so I can better see it in the report, and now I have my grand totals running across the entire bottom of the report. So there are a lot of different things you can do with this right-click menu. And I'm going to show you just one or two other things so that you get an idea of what you can do. But there are a lot of other functions that are available to you that I won't be mentioning in this video, just because the list is so extensive. The video would go on forever. But I would encourage you to look at the Working with Dashboards right-click menus document that's available that would describe and explain some of the other column or some of the other functions that I'm not going to be showing you. So you see that you can right-click and you can add and remove columns, exclude or include columns, I should say. You can add grand totals and you can add subtotals. And you can also move columns around, as you've also seen. I could move columns by simply grabbing the this column header box and dragging the column to another location. I can also move columns by right-clicking on the column header and using the move column function right here. And I can move the column either left or right from its current position. I can move it to another area of the report called prompts. And I could also choose to move it to another area of the report called sections, or because I'm in a pivot table, I also have an option to move it to columns. Now, I'm not going to move this particular column, but I think it might be useful to show you that I could move, actually, it might make sense in this case, to move this particular column, the budget record level name, to right-click and move this column to a place called sections. And what this will do, it'll break this single report into two pieces. And that column has now been moved out of the table and into this section right here across the top of the report. So I have my cash style accounts broken into a separate little table and a budget style account. My budget style accounts broken into their own separate little table. So I can look at them separately if that's what I wish to do. Now, for some people that's confusing. I completely understand that. I can also come back and find that little tab in front of where it says cash style account, and I can right-click on that, and I can choose to move my column back into the rows where it started from. And it's almost back in the right place. It goes into the front position, into the leftmost position, but now I can just drag the other column across and put it back where it belonged. And there's my report restored back the way it was after I started changing things. Now, one last thing I want to show you. I'm going to come over here to the view selector, and I think I'm going to look at the detail by account number, because I noticed in this report, in this version of this report, first of all, notice when I came to detail by account number, all of those columns that I had right-clicked and removed or excluded in the other view are now restored in this view because I had never removed them from this view. So all the columns are back. But one thing I noticed when I was looking at this report, or at this version of the report, is that there is no subtotal for cash style accounts and budget style accounts in this report. In this view. So I'm expanding it out just to make sure that I'm correct in what I'm thinking. I do have grand totals down here at the bottom, so that's nice. But it does appear that the originator of this report did not include subtotals for cash style and budget style accounts, or the budget record level name data column. So I can add those in if I want to, even though they weren't here to begin with. I simply right-click on that column where I want the subtotals to be gathered, and I can come down here to say Show Subtotal After Values, and the report refreshes itself, and now there is a subtotal row for cash style accounts and another subtotal row for the budget style accounts. So even though the original report does not have those items in it, I can add them if I find them to be useful. I'm also looking over here, and I'm seeing that there are totals, or subtotals actually, for each account. And I thought, well, that's a little odd, until I realized that there are two different accounting category groups in here for balances and expenses, and income balances and expenses, actually. So that's the reason that there are subtotals here. If I thought this was excessive, I could right-click on the account number column, and I could remove the subtotals from each column, but they are in fact performing a valuable function. So I'm going to leave those in there. Now, again, this is just an example of some of the right-click functions that you can use in most, if not all, of the reports that are available to you in analytics. There are some instances in which those right-click functions have been turned off or not enabled, but in general, you have an opportunity to use them across the board. Notice now when I came back to the summary by account number view, the original view on this report, my excluded columns have still remained excluded. If I were to leave this dashboard, even just going back home and then return to this dashboard, all of the changes that I had made through the right-click menu would have been removed, and the report would have been restored to its original version. The other way that I can undo or remove all of those customizations that I've made to this report is to use the page options button in the upper right-hand corner of the dashboard. Click that gear button, as it's generally known, and I can choose to clear my customizations, in which case the reports are going to rerun themselves. There they go. And the entire dashboard is going to rerun itself, and all of those removed columns will have been restored, and any other changes that I might have made anywhere through all of the views in this report would have been undone, and the report has been now restored to its original version. So either way I do it, I can restore the original report. Now, as I mentioned, there are a lot of right-click functions available to you in the right-click menus. As you can see, just by me bringing up that report again, there's a lot of different things that you can do, and some of them I'm going to cover perhaps in another video. But you also, I would encourage you once again to pull up the PDF document Working with Dashboards right-click menus to get a better idea and a more complete idea of what those right-click functions can do in most of the dashboard reports that are available to you. Thanks for watching.